It was only a couple of years ago that Matt Stafford and Jared Goff were traded for each other, but I thought it'd be a fun exercise to go back and say who's better? Who's better right now? Who's better all time, potentially? Although I think we know the answer to that one. So who's better right now? Jared Goff, Matt Stafford. Let's compare the two, starting off with some stats. So Stafford is going to be on the left, Goff is on the right, using three different stats here to compare them, and this is their career stats. So this is the average for their career. First we have passer rating, Pro Football Focus grade, and just to be clear, the PFF grade, that's the average per season grade, not the overall PFF grade. Little note there, whereas passer rating is just the overall passer rating, and then EPA, that's overall EPA per play. So you see that it's actually surprisingly close across the board here. In fact, Goff has a slight edge passer rating wise, although Stafford has the slight edge PFF grade wise, and an EPA also a slight edge to Stafford. Couple of interesting things to note though about some of these stats. For Goff, he obviously had that awful rookie year, which hurts a lot of his stats. Now, Stafford actually had some rough numbers early on as well, and is coming off of a pretty tough year, which we'll get into in just a second. But he's had more time to play, so therefore the one bad year doesn't hurt his overall stats as much as Goff's do. Also, the obvious thing to note is that it has gotten easier to throw the football as the NFL has gone along, made rule changes to make it easier for offenses to succeed, all that good stuff. So because of that, obviously a 90 passer rating 10 years ago was more impressive than a 90 passer rating today, but still, as a whole, no, I think, clear advantage stats-wise, although I probably would put the career stats to a slight edge to Stafford. That's how I would view it. I think that's reasonable to say, especially when you factor in sort of like, passer rating and EPA are very team-based stats, as, not just individual-based stats. And even with that, Stafford either holds his own or is better than Goff in those two categories, despite the fact that I would say Goff, for the most part, has had, for the majority of his career, has been in a good situation outside of really that first Detroit year. I thought that I guess the first Rams year, he's been in a good situations outside of that. Stafford has had very ups and downs situations for his career. So career-wise, I'm giving a slight edge to Stafford. However, if we go over to just last season, it's not even close. Goff was significantly better. The passer rating was 12 points higher, I guess technically, 11.9 points higher, but still a lot higher the passer rating was. The Pro Football Focus grade actually wasn't as big of a jump as you might think, only a 5.2 points difference between those two, although the EPA was massively different. I mean, Goff had an incredible 0.171 EPA last year, whereas Stafford was actually in the negatives last season. Now, again, situation comes into play, and unlike the first year after the trade where Stafford was in a great situation, Goff not so much, it has flipped. Goff was in a great situation with guys consistently getting open last year. Stafford did not have that benefit, but still, even if you look at the PFF grade, I think that explains some of it, and maybe that makes the gap closer, but there still is a gap there. Goff is coming off of a better season than Stafford. But I would still say that the question remains between these two players of, yes, I think Goff had a better year last year than Stafford. I think it'd be hard to argue the contrary. I think we pretty much all agree that Goff had a better year than Stafford. Stafford probably agrees with that, right? At the same time, it is Stafford's worst season, and Stafford was banged up last year, so he didn't get to play a full year where maybe some of those bad games could get better. Again, kind of the whole thing with Stafford has never been that he doesn't have high highs. It's been that he's been inconsistent. So I don't know if I'm totally willing to completely write off Stafford just due to the fact that Goff was significantly better this past season than Stafford was. I think also if you look at Goff's last year, his PFF grade was still below Stafford's career average, which is why I find it a very fascinating discussion. And I do think this is a great example of you can both look at the same stats and come to different conclusions based on how you evaluate players. The reality is, usually, I think, here's how I view it. Usually, a player like Stafford ends up still being good. Usually it ends up being a bad year, but then you bounce back and still have good years. But not always. And there's plenty of times where it goes the other way. And because you had a bad year, you're now just not quite as good anymore. So I think that without a doubt, there are some questions. So what you see next to me, these are 3 categories that I'm going to use to evaluate these two players, Stafford and Goff. Who is better in terms of stats, and then playmaking, and being a game manager? Those are kind of the 3 categories I'm going to look at. Just because you win 2 out of 3 doesn't necessarily mean I think that you are better, but just kind of a way to organize this. So first, we will start off with stats, which I really do think you can argue either one. I really think this isn't obvious to me. I am evaluating it right now, though, so I think I'm going to give Goff the stats department, credit here. I think I'm going to give him the stats, to me, actually, you know what? I'm going to give it a tie. I think that's where I'm going to go. I'm going to go tie because I think you could argue either one. So that's a tie for me. Playmaking, and I should define what I mean by playmaking, because it's not necessarily when you're under pressure making guys miss and making throws off balance and stuff like that, because sometimes being a playmaker is throwing the ball into the dirt. To me, I evaluate playmaking as the offense calls a play, they set up a play to do a certain thing. What do you do beyond that? So if the play doesn't work out, how do you still find ways to get yards down the field? If it's a disaster, how do you minimize that disaster? If the play works out, is there something better that you can do to make it work out even more so? That's how I view playmaking. And for me, I think there's no question that Stafford is a significantly better playmaker than Jared Goff is, even at this point in his career. Goff, I think, is kind of the whole thing about Jared Goff is he's great when things are going well, but when things go poorly, he can struggle. And we saw that in the Super Bowl that he was in, how things did not go too well for him. The flip side, though, is that the game manager stuff, I do think Goff does better. I think Goff is a significantly better game manager than Stafford. In fact, the knock with Stafford is sometimes he tries to be a playmaker too much. He tries to go above and beyond too much. And while I think that the good outweighs the bad there, the game manager side of football is still a very real side and something that definitely matters. So, for me, I am going to give that to Goff. So the stats, I'm going to give a tie or maybe a slight edge to Goff. Playmaking is a significant edge to Stafford. And then game manager is a less significant, but still, I think Goff deserves the W there. So who would I rather have? Well, you might be thinking, if I have Goff winning 2 out of 3 categories, shouldn't that be Goff? Well, like I said, winning 2 out of 3 doesn't necessarily mean that you are the better player. I'm not using electoral college system here. I'm going to go by popular vote style. And for me, I think that Stafford, what he does in the playmaking at this point in his career is enough to edge out the other stuff. Well, I do think that you could argue either side. If you ask me right now, I get one of these guys for next season. Who do I want? I'm taking the guy who's won a Super Bowl. I'm taking the guy who I've seen be elite in a postseason run before, which isn't a category on there, but I still factor that in. I am going to go Matt Stafford over Jared Goff right now. Now, who do I take for the next 5 years? Of course, Jared Goff, no question. It's just the, short-term versus long-term situation. And I do think Stafford has had a better career of the two so far, although I don't think it's crazy to think Goff could someday pass him. But as of now, I'm going Stafford right now and Stafford long-term. But again, I know Lions fans will disagree, or maybe you won't, because Lions fans love Stafford too. So Lions fans, let me know what you think in the comments below. And Rams fans too. You've had both these guys. What do you think in the comments below? I think Rams fans are going to pick Stafford, probably. But yeah, let me know in the comments below. Always love hearing from you. And of course, as always, thanks for watching.